Yeah, we're now live on YouTube, Chair.
Perfect. Thanks, Raj. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Northamptonshire Schools Forum on Thursday, the 11th of July. We've got a fairly busy agenda, but no actual votes. So obviously we'll move through as efficiently as we possibly can. Just first item, so item number one is just apologies for non-attendance. And we've had two apologies, one from Samantha Evans and the other from Paul Wheeler. So hopefully we're happy as a forum to accept those apologies. And then in terms of forum membership changes, welcome to Andrew, who I think is replacing Peter French from the Diocese of Peterborough. And Samantha Evans, although she sent apologies, is joining as a representative from PVI. So anything else I've missed there, Raj, or is that everything?
No, that's everything.
Perfect. That's great. If we go on to item number two, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of March 2024. Firstly, can you just wave or thumbs up if you're happy that those minutes are an accurate record of the meeting that we had? Great. And in terms of matters arising, I don't think there are any key action points that won't be covered by the current agenda. But have any members got any comments they would like to make or anything to pick up from the minutes from last time? Okay, perfect. We'll accept those then as a true and accurate record, and with no matters arising that aren't being picked up in the current agenda. So we'll move straight on to item number three, which Catherine Walker I will hand over to, which is the 23-24 schools outturn and the implementation of the excess balances policy for the 23-24 financial year. So Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, today I'm just going to present the paper that hopefully you've all had sight of previously. The highlights of that are that the schools ended, or the maintained schools ended the last financial year with a surplus of just under 5 million, which was a decrease from the previous end of financial year. On of those, that was 38 schools, 33 being a surplus, 5 being in deficit. Obviously, as Table 1 highlights previously. Then we sort of had this time around, we actually had visibility of the SB1 forms, the surplus balance analysis forms. So we could do an analysis of those. For each of those 38 maintained, and no schools exceeded the 10% permitted uncommitted balance from the policy that was previously been agreed at Schools Forum. So, and that's, I think that's highlighted on Table 2. Broken, obviously the first table, just to say Appendix A, sorry, gives the maintained balances, but just for revenue, and Appendix 2 goes into more detail, and that's where you can see the analysis from the SB1 forms. So we can actually see the split between capital and revenue, including the movements in year as well. The simple truth is that carry forwards are decreasing because school budgets are becoming increasingly squeezed. A lot of that, I will say, is through the second year of the increase for the support staff salaries. So they considerably exceed the value that obviously from the budget uplift that normally you would see. So I think that's part of the reason why there's been such a decrease between the 7.1 that it was previously to just below 5 million. So that's the sort of edited highlights of the report. I'm open to any questions anyone may have.
Thanks, Catherine. Sandra, I saw you move then. Was that a question? No, it's just readjusting your camera perfectly. Catherine, I mean, firstly to say, just to draw forum's attention, on Appendix 1 on that document, just thank you to Catherine and the team for including the percentages in the final column, because we felt when we were looking previously at kind of either surplus or deficit, it's useful to kind of understand that as a percentage of total income rather than just a raw figure. And obviously the other thing that I think is I guess probably worthy of note, but I'm interested in if you've got any thoughts on this, Catherine, is that there are some fairly substantial surpluses that are kind of propping up the overall position, not least from kind of the sole remaining secondary school in Northampton, who have a fairly large reserve, but there are also some other schools with quite high surplus positions, and what your thoughts are about the vulnerability of, I guess, the block as a whole, if those reserves were to, or those surplus positions were to reduce over time.
Yes, I fully expect some of the higher percentage schools figures to continue to decrease. Some of the schools that have the higher percentages are some of our very, very small, rural and extremely vulnerable village schools, I will say. And obviously, because they get a small budget, 10% doesn't generate possibly even enough for what they need for, say, certain staffing. So I know why some of those do have considerably higher percentage. I think the simple answer is, even following on from this, more and more schools are submitting requests for deficit budgets. So I know that number from the end of March 24 has increased by an additional 2. So the trajectory is more and more schools are going to struggle to set balanced budgets, obviously. And then once the carry forward has gone and there is no more carry forward, they will have to look at about addressing potentially other issues they may have in the school, staffing, or trying to be more creative, more collaborative working, things like that. So there is a real risk in the next couple of years we will see the carry forwards go down even further and the number of deficit requests increase.
Yeah, understood. And just in terms of those deficit requests, I think at previous forum we've discussed the plans for those schools that are in cumulative deficit to have a panel meeting with the local authority, both with the heads, business managers and their representatives of governance, to firstly try and understand what the issues are, and secondly to then come up with a plan for what can be done about that. Where are we up to in that process?
We haven't convened the first panel as yet, partly due to staffing at the councils, but also we haven't actually had all the budgets in. I will say now we haven't the budget submissions are not all in to date, but of the ones that have come in, yes, we have received numerous ones from the schools already in cumulative deficit. We've done initial checks and we're now waiting to convene those panels to move it to the next stage.
Great, thanks, Catherine. And I think previously forum members had kind of indicated that they'd be happy to sit on some of those panels if that was useful to the local authority. I certainly would. I know Paul has said he would previously, but I'm sure there are other forum members who'd be happy to do that and support as well.
Yes, I mean, that's what I think the ultimate plan is. What we all, I think possibly now, due to the late stage of the sort of academic year, I'd imagine those panels would start in September.
Yeah, understood. I think I saw a hand from Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'm sorry, I appreciate I've come to this in my first meeting. I sit on a number of other schools forums. I'm kind of anxious about that, the need for those structural discussions. I tried tracking back a little bit to go further uh, into the past on some of the school budgets that are listed here. And it seems to me that the trajectory of travel is very clear, particularly with primaries. Obviously, I have huge sympathies with that. Diocesan schools tend to be often the small schools. We're being very proactive in trying to have discussions with those schools around not just internal solutions to those problems, but also systemic ones in terms of what structures those schools sit within, whether that's federation, whether that's MAT, whatever it might be. I think there's a real sense of urgency, is there not, around having those meetings as soon as possible, and also having meetings that provide some form of solution-driven dimension, not just a diagnostic. So I was just wondering what format those meetings might take.
If I'm honest, we've not actually. This will be the first time we've actually ever gone down the path of having panels. So they're still very much in their infancy. We're trying to come up with a model that works, get the right membership on those panels, and even in as much as what the agendas of those panels will follow. So it is very much a case of sort of, I think it's something that will evolve over time. So I don't know if we've got the definitive answer of what it should look like and how they will actually work until we start travelling down the path with schools. And obviously, because my opinion is very much it needs to be some challenge to make sure the schools have thought of all the possible ideas around, like, structurally, but also thinking wider than just their school. And I think that's sometimes, but until we sort of present those ideas and challenges, we don't know what the school's responses will be. So, you know, forgive me, but like I said, we're coming from a blank canvas, really, and we're trying to build this up and trying to be as supportive as we can. But we don't know how it will work until we sort of
I'm sure
travel down the path a bit.
I'm sure you are, Catherine. Chair, if I just make a suggestion there. I wonder, Catherine, whether it might be looking to what other local authorities have done, because you might find that those approaches are perhaps more clearly formulated, and there are some good examples around. And the nervousness for me when I just took a few random samples of some of those schools and their budgetary position, and looking at their staffing structures at the moment, which obviously it's all published, it just seemed to me that many of those schools were making staff changes next year already. And it just seems, therefore, that it's a shame that if some of the more vulnerable pupils are going to lose their support through rather obvious, obviously people being the most expensive bit, that it's going to have an even further knock-on on later agenda items around high needs block and that kind of thing. So I don't know about others, but I'd with the huge sensitivities being new to this board, but caution some sense of anxiety of really getting those things sorted out before the 1st of September.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think we're honestly looking for structural changes to come into effect this financial year necessarily, because the school has already submitted the budget. It's just we would want to see a clear recovery plan when they do start to so let's say they give us a ballpark figure of what the deficit it currently is now or projecting to be, and how they're going to make inroads into bring that down back to a surplus position. Now, just to say, couple of the schools already in deficit, they're looking at a 5-year plan already. That is longer than the 3 years that normally we would permit, just because of the value of it. No. But I think just so I don't expect any immediate changes for the start of the academic year. Definitely not, because that's too anyway.
It's just that if you take the individual schools, clearly you can see that there will need to be staffing changes in their schools given their current circumstances, and that's an in-year position for those schools, not a next year position. I'll stop there. Anyway, thank you.
No. I mean, just to say also, obviously, I've been working with a lot of these schools in deficits in previous years, and the concern I have is that the school and the governing body are not addressing those situations. We've suggested stuff previously, so from my perspective, I'm hoping these panels will be a more formalised way to make suggestions, and suggestions be taken on board, rather than, because at the moment that's all they have been from myself, recommendations. I can't implement them. So some of the schools have made the situations worse because they haven't addressed it early enough when the situation presented itself. So I'm hoping that there will be a real positive working together with the schools that are in deficit to try and, find a solution and manage it through, appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Andrew. I wonder whether, Andrew, if you know of some local authorities where they've got a kind of, I guess, if they're further down this road, where they've got a kind of standardized agenda for those meetings or a standardized process, that will probably be really helpful to share with Catherine and Forum as well, because I think, as Catherine says, this is the first time that Northampton have undertaken that type of work. So if you can point us in the direction of any areas of good practice, I think that would be really gratefully received.
Absolutely. And of course, what I'm not saying is that I do appreciate none of this is easy, because it isn't. It's really difficult.
Yeah.
Let's face it, the bottom line is schools aren't receiving enough money, or some types of schools aren't receiving enough money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing, Catherine, that's worth noting from that is, I think you're absolutely right, is the purpose of the panels has to be to get to agreed actions, because I do know informally that some schools feel as though that the advice, if that's the right word for it, is something they can either take or leave and actually just worry about another day, rather than actually the panel forces them to say, right, we are going to agree that we are going to do this. And there's obviously a local authority funded school, then they are committing to undertake whatever actions that you've agreed. And maybe just the thing, I take the point as well about the question of timing and urgency. So you're right. I think it's probably unrealistic to think that the meetings could happen this side. But I wonder, is it realistic to think that the dates could be agreed and sent to those schools with the invitation, so that at the start of once we get back in September, we can actually get on with them fairly quickly?
I can certainly take that back as an action to try and plan stuff in people's diaries, definitely.
Yeah, perfect. That would be great.
Chair, is it possible to include governors, presume, in that? Because this is a stewardship issue, isn't it? So that'd be great.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think, it has to be representative of the school and also from the governing board as well, because I think, again, if you're going to arrive at the agreed actions, it has to be all parties that are committing to that.
So can I just be clear then, who of Schools Forum wishes to also be included in the panel, so I can obviously send out the appropriate invites?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an easy mechanism for people to volunteer from that, rather than waving your hands in the air now. Raj, would it be possible for you to just send something around as an email, and then for forum members to indicate that they would be happy or otherwise to participate in one of those panels?
Yeah, I'll send an email around, and if members can indicate their interest in that, I'll get that onto Catherine.
Great, thanks. Sandra, then Marie.
Thank you. Just on that same point, would it be appropriate for Academy Trust to be involved in that? So we're talking about maintained schools.
I think so. I think so, for probably the reasons that Andrew mentioned. It is because I think whilst Academy Trust panel members would not be there, I guess, for the kind of accountability that the local authority wishes to exercise, where I think they might be really helpful is in formulating some of those agreed actions that they might have had experience of taking with their own schools and mats. So I think it probably, and again, this would be one for officers to take away, is in the design of that panel, there wouldn't be kind of a member of forum there to exercise accountability, because that's not our job. but actually our role could be partly in design of some of the actions that needs to be taken in order to improve the financial position. So it would be a supportive role rather than a kind of accountability role, and I do recognise that, I know for colleagues working in maths and within academies, some of these things are likely to be things that you've got considerable experience of doing already, which some colleagues in maintained schools may not have grappled with previously in quite the same way. So I think we probably just need to make sure that the membership of that was clarified, so it was clear what a schools forum member was doing there, that's not about accountability, but it's more about support.
Thanks, James.
Marie.
Thanks, Chair. A similar question, really. Is it just for forum members? Because I personally feel my school business manager would be a better support to that panel than I would.
It's probably one for the local authority. That, I mean, I think, yeah, it's whoever would be most useful to the school is. I think that would be the criteria in formulating some of those agreed actions. So yeah, I would support that, but I'd be interested if, ultimately, I guess that would be the local further council to decide if they thought that was most appropriate. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Catherine.
I suppose I wouldn't personally. I'm speaking on behalf of the schools, and if they're seeing a huge panel made up of X amount of people, it could be a bit daunting. Would they really want to discuss all of those things necessarily at that point in time? So, if there's probably, it's a bit top heavy, and say we've got 10 panel members and say 3 or 4 people from the school, it's a little bit unbalanced. So I suppose that would be my only concern, really.
Yeah, sorry, I wouldn't imagine that all of the volunteers would serve on the same panel.
Okay.
So I don't think you'd ever have everyone in one place for exactly those reasons. I think, what you'd want is perhaps a schools forum representative and then representatives from the local authority. So it wouldn't be unmanageable. But I'm also, because obviously the schools forum couldn't do every one, but actually those that were happy to would do a couple of panels with a couple of schools rather than it be everyone there for everyone, if that makes sense.
Okay. Apologies, my misunderstanding.
Yeah, no, it's more likely to have been the way I expressed it, Catherine. So that's fine. Andrew and then James.
Can I suggest, I was just thinking, it's probably a segmented approach, really, isn't it? Because I think you've got and I don't know where this is going on in Northamptonshire, but you've got the system leader discussion, haven't you? Which is about bringing people together to talk fundamentally about place planning, which is then linked to the sustainability and viability of all schools and their flourishing. So I think there's that meeting that needs to happen, and I think it's dangerous to conflate that with this concept of panel. I think there's then so I do think, I don't know, I think it's for schools forum, my experience would be for schools forum to be asking where those conversations are happening rather than organising them, given the remit but given the fact that, it's finances that underpin the need. The second thing then would be, I'm not sure what the panels are for. Are they punitive or are they co-collaborative? They sound a little bit like a hearing. I'm not sure that I would go for that. I think this is a conversation. No school deliberately overspends, very rarely in my experience, in terms of incompetent. This is about trying to, balance finite resources on increasing expectation and need, isn't it? Very difficult, challenging circumstance. So I would have thought a smaller panel, maybe not called a panel, but, smart panel with a small p, which is working with schools to have a really good constructive understanding of why they're in the position they're in, and to just double check that they are doing all the other things that might be considered to be normal or necessarily normal in the context. But then there's also those schools that you might have which is a smaller subset, isn't it? If they exist at all, I don't know, where you have concerns about them, where that is more of a panel, i.e., recommendations are being ignored or whatever that might be. But I do think it's worth looking at in those directions, because in order to get the co-collaboration, and that means that schools are sharing the intricacies of their setup within a much more confidential environment. I am worried about, though, where these system level conversations might be happening, where people are being brought together to look at that kind of direction. I don't mean directing top down, but I mean presenting, trying to signpost where there are options and giving Academy Trust the opportunity to speak into that space and others. Do those things happen, or is that something that perhaps we ought to push for as a forum?
Yeah, I think, well, there's probably a couple of points in there. So yes, I think we ought to definitely push for that as a forum. I mean, I know that, we've probably had a few starts on different things, and that I guess has been difficult with some significant staffing changes at the top. That's made that hard, but I think that's absolutely right. There is a kind of strategic piece of work. I've seen Sandra's comment there. I think you're right. Maybe a panel is not the right word for it, but that co-collaboration is really important. I think they are supportive meetings designed to help schools and governors address the situations that some of those schools are in, and try and work together to identify potential solutions, with the caveat, as you say, that funding's challenging. Of course that it is for everything, but I guess informally, what I have felt about kind of doing some odd bits of work with some of the schools that are on there is they recognize the position they're in, but do not currently have the opportunity to meet with people and discuss ideas and solutions. So that becomes problematic for them, because in a sense you feel like, well, I haven't got a solution, so what do? Well, I just keep on ploughing with what I've got, and I'll worry about it at some point in time. So the idea of having somebody who can actually have people who can kind of spend a bit of time objectively looking at where things are and how we improve that situation, and what is throwing ideas there for them to agree with. But there is also a subset that, Catherine rightly identifies, that I know has been frustrating at times for the local authority, where they feel like actually they've given them quite a lot of business management support, given them some recommendations, and they just haven't followed them. And I think that you're right, that's a different thing. So it might be that you've got kind of different, whatever you call them might need to change, but there's kind of different purposes. But the idea is to help those schools and those governors get a bit more expertise and a bit of dialogue with people who may have experienced similar challenges and found some way of coping with them. Yeah. James.
Thank you. Really, I mean, actually, sort of as the conversation's gone on, I think it's kind of addressed the questions, and it's probably out of scope of forum, but I can see Joe's on here as well, and so it's probably more about school improvement team and more for the local authority, but just really to put a due regard in there for actually, if this is going to be a supportive process for the well-being of the head teachers who are then having to deliver on the actions that are agreed, because no head teacher I've sat down with in the last year, the first word that's been out of, including mine, out of their lips is budget, and what are we going to do? So just, and I think as the conversation's gone on, and that sense of a panel has gone to a softer P, and that's been in there, but just to put a cry out for the head teachers out there as well in terms of it being supportive, because I know that budget is the thing that keeps me up at night, number one, and its implications. So it was just a sort of a cry out for that, really, just to make sure that had due consideration. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, James. No, I think that's a really important point, and I think the purpose of it. And I know when council started talking about it, the aim is actually to try and help support governors and heads, not beat them over the stick, because you can do that, and actually it's about how do you get to some form of agreed actions and some plan that you can put into place that all parties are happy with. Because I think at the moment that lack of communication actually leads to more of a feeling of isolation, that you've got heads that feel like I've got to do something about my budget, but I don't know what to do. And that can't go anywhere at the moment.
Yeah, and absolutely, it's been quite a lonely year in that sense, I think, for a lot of head teachers. So that would be useful.
Yeah, thanks. Alison.
Yes, so just coming in on this, obviously, and I think somebody mentioned earlier about the school place planning being critical to all of this. Obviously, we're having regular conversations, and we do all the time have regular conversations with schools, mainstream or not, regarding viability with falling roles, particularly around the primary sector at the moment. Obviously, it's an ongoing issue, and without a doubt, NNC need to be more sort of structured in its approach as we're getting more and more sophisticated with our forecasting, and we are, believe it or not. We will have much earlier response time to have those conversations, and it's definitely without a doubt a joined up approach with Catherine's sort of panel suggestion, etc. Because out of the discussions that we have is about the strategy to get out of a situation in terms of a timely way. And yes, there's discussions around pan reduction or not pan reduction, because even though a school might be in a position, as you know, where they would want to reduce their pan, the figures don't support it in terms of an area-wide sufficiency matter. So we have to work with the schools to develop some other strategy and supporting strategy around that. And that might be looking at federations, academizations, amalgamations, whatever you want. We have to have those kind of conversations to sort of like work our way through these things. So yes, so I think we need, in terms of the panel suggestion, yes, I think we need to define it a little bit more, but more of a joined up approach, because obviously we don't want to be cross-cutting that, and it is a kind of a secular thing, if you like, in terms of the viability of economic viability of schools. I agree with you. Everybody's been saying about the supporting schools, and the conversation goes on too long about and schools go too long without sort of raising the hand in terms of their financial viability, particularly in the mainstream sector. So before we, more often than not, when it's too late, actually, it's earlier intervention is what we're trying to get to.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's absolutely right. And if we get the sort of model right, the aim in the long term will be to do it earlier and earlier. So actually, you're master of your own destiny in a way before those things become hugely problematic. Thanks, everybody. So I think we've got some actions in terms of dates, some actions in terms of panel membership. And I think, particularly if Andrew's got any examples of local authorities that have held those small P panels where it is a kind of co-constructed agreement on actions, that will be really helpful for us to have a look at, and particularly for officers to have a look at. Great, we'll hold that one there. So item number 4 is over to Soraya, which is the 23-24 DSG outturn.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm bringing this report to School Forum members to update on the draft outturn position for the DSG grant for 23-24. If you cut section 2 of the report, that provides the background information on the DSG grant and its 4 blocks. Section 3, which is the main part of the report, breaks down the original DSG budget for 23-24, which was set at 354.9 million. The allocation was revised in July, leading to a reduction of 308k, and that reduction primarily stems from a 382k decrease in the early years block due to lower participation numbers. This was partially offset by a 74k increase in the high needs block from additional funding for special free schools. The DSG was further adjusted in the November allocation with a reduction of 6k to the high needs block as part of the import and export adjustment. The remaining reduction of 236k relates to the recoupment amount from the schools block and high needs block, which reflects the grant paid directly to academies. So the revised DSG budget for the council is 119.11 million. The draft outturn position for the overall DSG is an overspend of 6.869 million, and that's summarised in the table just under section 3. Moving on to section 4 of the report, the table under section 4.2 shows a detailed breakdown. It shows the reserves brought forward that we brought forward last year and that have been used to offset the DSG overspend, as well as the in-year adjustments which related to some income due from the West as part of the IAA agreements. The actual outturn has come in below the previously reported position to school forum members. We're committed to working and improving our forecasting processes and working closely with the service leads to ensure that we produce an accurate forecast for 24-25, incorporating the lessons learned that we've had from 23-24. Section 4.3 of the report outlines the reasons for the overspend. It's primarily in the high needs block, and we will be discussing that further in one of the other reports. This area is expected to face increasing pressure in the future for 24-25 and future years. As outlined in the report, the main reasons are an increase in the number of EHCPs, the use of independent placements due to lack of sufficiency in NNC schools, and this costing the authority a lot more when the pupil is placed when the pupil's not placed within our own schools, an increase in mainstream top-ups, NNC not having an AP school, which means pupils are being placed in more expensive settings. We have some overspends in the central schools block, and these were reported previously, and they're mainly due to staffing, and this is going to be a pressure for 24-25 as well, as this is the area where there's a budget cut 20% year on year for historical commitments. So we need that's another area that we will be looking at when we come to setting the budget for 25-26. There was an underspend on the early years block, and this relates to the service not being fully staffed and unable to recruit due to the recruitment freeze. This is now underway, and the budget for 24-25 will be utilised. Section 4.4 of the report details the work that is taking place within the service to help mitigate these pressures over the next year. Since the last school forum meeting, a lot of work has been taking place behind the scenes within the service and finance to help put together the DSU management plan, and this will be shared with school forum members when this is complete. The recommendations of this report are for school forum to note, and Appendix A attached to this report breaks down the spend to cost centre level. So that brings me to the end of that report, and I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thanks, Soraya. So any questions or comments? I think maybe, obviously, the kind of the overall overspend position is it might be something that we cover on sort of the next item with Charlotte when we kind of start looking at high needs, perhaps in a little bit more detail. But obviously, the situation with high needs block is fairly bleak, and with no kind of anticipated let up in the number of EHCPs, but there are some things that I think Charlotte's likely to cover that we can talk about there. Thanks very much, Soraya. So we'll conclude item number 4 there with noting the report. Item 5, just before we go on to the main part of that, you may remember that forum we had some discussions about how some of the early help locality funding was awarded and the kind of transparency of that system. And very kindly, Marie went along to observe one of those panels. And I think just before we go into item 5, I don't know if I'd just invite Charlotte and Marie to kind of talk about their experience and what they learnt from that. And I think Marie's also written a paper on that, which I think wasn't included in the papers sent out to forum, but I don't know if either Marie, you can talk that through now and we can send that out following the meeting, or if you want to screen share, I'm kind of happy with either of those. Charlotte and Marie, however you think that's best accomplished.
Thank you, James. I don't mind, Charlotte. Up to you.
Yeah, I don't mind. I wouldn't be able to share it because I'm just where I've opened my my computer on. I think Raj, you've had that paper, so I think we could share it post the meeting if that's helpful. If I just sort of introduce the sort of concept to decision-making groups before I bring Marie in about her experiences. So there are multiple different decision-making groups within the local authority which look at funding for a host of different things. Some of those is in relation to education, health and care plans and decision-making around should a child be assessed, should a child receive a plan, what level of funding should that child receive, what type of provision does that child need. There are other panels that look at exceptional circumstances. So if the child has a placement breakdown and we need to look at a different type of provision, that kind of thing. We also have a panel for our early help locality funding requests that come in from schools. So all of these panels are made up by multiple different agencies and professionals. Usually when any child is discussed, there will be at least one agency on that panel that does know the child. So the child has been open to a particular agency, whether that's within a local authority service or whether that's one of our commissioned outreach services, but usually somebody in the room, their service will know the child. There's exceptional circumstances where sometimes children have moved into the area and nobody does know the child particularly well. It was actually Marie's suggestion back in December, January time, that it would be helpful for professionals from school settings to be able to come along and observe some of these panels to help with their understanding of how decisions are made and how that can help them when they're writing paperwork, etc. Took a little while for us to get the sort of protocols and stuff in place for that, but that has been happening since Easter now. So now each of our panels, we regularly have a group of professionals that come and observe that. The panels are inevitably developing over time, developing almost on a weekly basis with kind of things that we feel need to be better and to be changed. Marie was one of the first people to come along and observe one of our panels. And I think the feedback that Marie gave was really measured in its approach. And I know we've had lots of people that have come and observed since and also completed some feedback for us. And some of the changes have already been implemented from that. But if I hand over to you, Marie.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, I'm happy to share the document that I read. It was a panel feedback form that I was just asked to complete. I think the first thing is credit to the local authority for enacting lots of change to make these things happen in a speedy fashion. There was a lot of professionals on the call discussing children, and I felt that every child's case was heard and was none of the decisions that were made were done on a budget-led basis. They were all done led by the children's needs and the evidence that we had presented to the panel, which was really, really reassuring to hear. I think inevitably, because of the caseload, some of the discussions were very rapid, and I know the amount of time that goes in from a SENCO's perspective to complete an RSA or to complete an EHCP consultation, and then to have that agreed or not in kind of a couple of minutes would be really disheartening. However, such is the demand for these services, I guess that was kind of a necessary evil. I do feel that the one-page review that the caseworkers present at those panels should be shared with schools, because I think that could streamline school paperwork significantly if SENCOs knew exactly what the panel got to hear and not necessarily spent so much time on reams and reams of paperwork that sit behind that the panel perhaps never get to see. It was reassuring that in most cases, somebody from Rowan Gate or Maplefields was able to talk about the young person and had seen them in their school setting. That wasn't the case with every single child. And I did feel that perhaps where nobody had seen the child, that the decisions couldn't be made as accurately. So I don't know if that's something that can be worked on for the future. I think the other thing, somebody on the panel was really aware of how schools work and how TA contracts work and TA hours and salaries, but there were other people on the panel that didn't seem to have as good an understanding. And I know Charlotte's doing a separate piece of work around what an EHCP funding looks like versus what a TA currently costs with on costs, because I think that the figures that the panel are referring to are quite out of date compared with what schools are currently paying in terms of salaries. And also I think there was a limited understanding from some of the panel members that a child's needs could be met with a TA. I can't remember the example, something like a TA for 5 minutes in every 20. Therefore, we're only going to award this much of a contract. Well, you can't employ somebody for 5 minutes out of 20. So there was just a little bit of disconnect, I felt, between the theory of the EHCP and the realities of staffing schools and school contracts. But overall, I'm grateful to have been able to see the process. It certainly helped me and my Senko think about how we will present cases in the future and the information that's most relevant. And I would be happy to work with Charlotte and the team that she's putting together, looking at TAs and staff salaries to make the panels and the EHCP funding more realistic. I think that's all really. Oh, I suppose the only other point, and I know this is a nationwide issue, but there was a comment made several times about the school not having had an EP in to see a child. Well, it's very, very difficult to get an EP in. EPs aren't even completing statutory work within timescale. So to say that there was no EP evidence of cognition or IQ tests having been done, I don't think that's realistic given the current staffing pressures that all schools are having trying to secure an EP. So again, just some understanding and realism from the panel about who the evidence is likely to come from. It probably won't be an EP, but we have to trust other professionals' judgments as well. I think that's all I've got, James. I think to call it a paper is perhaps overstating it, but I'm happy to share the feedback form and perhaps circulate that to panel members.
Yeah, feedback. So just before we go on to the main body, then from Charlotte, are there any sort of questions, comments, thoughts on what we've heard so far? Richard.
Yeah. Thank you, Marie. I mean, that's really helpful, particularly when respecting the difficulty head teachers have in deploying their TAs. I think in terms of cost, I think you were quite right in terms of saying that the costs are kind of pretty much out of date. But also added to that, I would suggest that they need to add the cost of training that particular TA in things like, you know, autistic awareness or ADHD awareness, which is probably missing as well. But to have that background really helps me in my job as a union supporting TAs and obviously have an appreciation of where the decisions come from. So thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? Yeah, thanks. And Marie, if we could just, we'll note there, thanks to you for attending that and to Charlotte for facilitating it. I think it's really useful. And I think as we, you know, in reference back to this earlier discussion about panels, is that there's obviously all of the formal remit of Schools Forum, but I do think it is really powerful if forum members are happy to give up bits of time to try and support Northamptonshire with trying to get as much best practice into the system as we possibly can, and that's great. So yeah, Charlotte, over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't unmute then. Raj, are you able to share the presentation I sent you?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll share that now.
Sorry, I realised I didn't introduce myself at the start of that last item, and I'm not sure I've come across everyone before, but so I'm Charlotte Franks. I am the interim head of SEND for Northants, and are presenting today in relation to the high needs block, to kind of, as a local authority, we've been working through a number of things recently, and that's because we've entered a deficit position with our DSG, or particularly our high needs block, at the end of this financial year, and we need to do some working in order to form our DSG financial management plan. That involves us looking at interventions, patterns, and potentially trying to add some financial strategies to those interventions and going forward, and look at how that's going to impact on our budget over time. So we've been working really closely as a group of people. So the services, the SEND services, we've been working with finance, and we've been working with our performance and intelligence team in order to work through a number of things in order to get us a good understanding of the picture of where we're at. So the presentation that I've got is built on a modelling that's been completed by our performance and intelligence team. So this is not necessarily exact people, exact figures, etc., all the way through, because it's based on modelling. But it does give us a good indication as to the direction of travel. So I'll go through, so I'll glance over some of the slides and I'll talk through some of the slides in a little bit more detail. And then I think it would be good for us to have a bit of a discussion at the end around what that direction of travel is telling us at the moment. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Raj, thank you. So in order to establish how we model change going forward, or how we model the picture going forward, we have used snapshots from the CEN2 data over the last 5 years and looked at the children in Northamptonshire over those 5 years and mapped the change that's happened. So this is all children that are funded through the high needs block, which is predominantly children with an education, health and care plan, those in receipt of early help locality funding or some kind of high needs funding historically, and those who have been permanently excluded from school and are being supported by the education inclusion team. So we've mapped it, rather than looking at SEN children, we've mapped it in regards to all children that receive funding from the high needs block. And what you can see is after a couple of years of steady increase, the increase over the last 3 years has been quite significant. So there's been quite a sort of hockey stick type climb over the last 3 years. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So then what we needed to do is we needed to break those children down into categories of the type of provision that they're accessing, so we could measure the type of provision over a period of time. So we've looked at mainstream, maintained special schools, further education, independent special schools, independent mainstream, amongst a whole other sort of host of different remits. And then we've mapped the changes of those over time as well. So the changes of where those children are funded and the types of provision that they're in. And you can see from the figures on the left-hand side, there's been a huge growth in mainstream. So growth of 120% of children in the mainstream sector that are active, accessing high needs funding, a huge growth in independent special schools and independent mainstream schools. So the independent mainstream schools had quite a small number to a slightly bigger small number, but in terms of mainstream and independent specials, they're both quite large numbers in that. Okay, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. And then taking the information that the last 5 years have told us, they have then applied a model which looks at what the next 8 or so years will show us. And as you can imagine, things are growing in a concerning picture. So we're looking at an estimation that by January 2032 that there'll be 6,288 children that are accessing that are requiring to access support from the high needs block, and you can see that that's increasing year on year. We've also looked at the picture by different age groups as well. So we've reached the point now where the reforms of 10 years ago are finally seeing some children age out of their EHC plans. So children that previously had the extension to 25, we've reached the point now where some of these are beginning to age out of the system. But when we're looking at children that are coming out of the system in comparison to children that are coming in, most of the ages will still have an increase over time. The biggest increase looks to be within secondary schools. So that's the steepest incline. Primary schools has an initial steep incline, but looks like it possibly will tail off in 6 or 7 years' time. And again, with our younger children, again, that's more of a flatline picture. But secondary schools and 16 to 19 cohort are continuing to grow considerably. If you can click to the next slide, please. We'll just bypass this one if that's okay. So then what we need to do then is look at what interventions we could use. So if we start mapping and modeling interventions, what can we try and achieve from that? So where are we drawing our conclusions? Where do we think that we have got some of the issues. So we believe we've got some issues in relation to sufficiency. We believe that we have got some issues in relation to support within the mainstream sector. And because of these things, we're moving into a position where we're putting children in more and more costly provision. If we can move on to the next slide. We then started to look at what increase in sufficiency might look like, and if we increase sufficiency significantly, how might that impact the budget over time? So the models that we looked at is mapping to alternative provision schools, because we know that's an area of need for us at the moment, looking at places both in primary and secondary for alternative provision. We looked at more radical options of if we built a SEND unit in every single secondary school in Northamptonshire, some more units within our primary provision. Again, how does that accumulate numbers? What does that look like? What's the financial benefits of that? Next slide, please, Raj. And finally, if we were to build 2 new special schools, sort of duplicating what Maplefields and Redkite offer, again, how's that going to impact on numbers and budget over time? If we could go to slide 10, please, which is the last slide. Thank you. So all of those modelling all of those buildings have been built in, and obviously the cost of the building of those would not come from the high needs block. That would have to come from capital. Kind of estimating the cost of that building to be somewhere around £100 million. So we would require £100 million of capital investment to get to a position where we could build those schools in. But I think the important thing for us to think about and consider with this is, even with all of those interventions in relation to sufficiency, as you can see, what the baseline total was for the budget going forward in blue, and then the modified total in orange, which takes into account all of those different interventions, we're not going to solve the problem. We're not going to build our way out of the deficit position over the next 8 to 10 years. So we can increase sufficiency, and we do believe we need to increase sufficiency, but sufficiency alone is not what's going to help us solve the problem. Raj, if you could just close down the PowerPoint for a minute. Thank you. So we have the issues that we have, and North Northampton are not unique in these issues. These are national issues, aren't they? The issues that we have is we have more and more children coming into the system at a really, really high rate. We've got different levels of support that we offer them. We're moving children around these different levels of support. We've got some aspects where children are moving into more costly support, not because they need it, but because there's a lack of sufficiency earlier on. But even if we are able to do something really sort of skillful in terms of how we keep these children in, inevitably the only way that we are going to bring ourselves back into a position where we are not going to bankrupt ourselves over the next 10 years is to slow down the amount of children that are coming into the system. Some of this other modelling looked at early interventions that we're putting into place, and how our family hubs model, how our outreach offer, how all of the other early intervention things that we're doing, how they might affect the impact of numbers of EHC plans over time, and will they reduce that? And that's been built into the modelling as well. But it's a somewhat bleak picture, because we really don't think that even with £100 million of investment into places, that we're going to solve the problem with the amount of funding that we have for the number of children that are requiring support from that funding. And this is just talking from an absolute funding perspective. This is not even taking into account children's outcomes. And we know we don't want children in the independent sector unless they absolutely need to be there. We want children in their own communities and being supported well. So outcomes aside, it's a really difficult position. I don't think any of us have any magic answers for how we solve this immediately. but would welcome Schools Forum's thoughts on the presentation. This modelling is not an exact science, it's modelling, and we obviously don't know for sure that this is going to happen, but it's at the moment where we're working with in terms of our estimates for how we're going to do our DSG management plan.
Perfect. Thanks, Charlotte. I'll hand over for questions and comments. I think, Andrew, your hand's raised. I think you may still be on mute, Andrew.
Sorry about that. There we go. Charlotte, that was a really helpful breakdown and analysis. I've sat through a whole range of these meetings in different local authorities over the last few weeks, the last few months, and at the DFE, and some of the analysis was not as clear as that which you've just presented. So thank you for that. My question relates to this. I don't. What discussions, if any, and apologies again if this is product of me being new to this group, what discussions, if any, have been had with the DFE? Because I say that because obviously, I mean, for example, I sat on Cambridgeshire till very recently, and obviously safety valve funding has kicked in Cambridgeshire. It was 36 to 40 million overspent, projected a lot higher than that. That safety valve funding is making a huge difference. Obviously, it's predicated on a cost reduction plan. The money doesn't arrive otherwise. West Northamptonshire, as you're probably aware, are in the process of talking to the DFE in these contexts as well. You're right. It seems to me, looking at the figures, just like a lot of other places, the sufficiency, the cost savings anyway wouldn't be derived quickly enough to save the insurmountable overspend. So I don't know who's involved in that, or if there's been any, or what's the DFE perspective on this?
Yeah, it's quite difficult, really. We've had some initial meetings with the DFE, looking at how we're going to present it, and we've had some honest conversations about, well, our financial management plan's unlikely to suggest that we're going to come in line in 5 years' time. It's unlikely to say that. So are you wanting us to present as it is, or are you wanting us to present to say that it's going to come in line when we know it's not? And they said, no, you obviously need to be honest within that. It's really difficult because with each of these programs come with some levels of commitment. And I know that other local authorities that have, I don't know whether it was the safety valve or delivering better value. I can't remember which program that they were in, but because they weren't able to deliver something in the plan that was maybe slightly ambitious, but sort of on the trajectory, they weren't able to hit it, then they weren't able to get the funding. And they'd kind of built on everything and getting this funding, but they weren't able to hit their sort of first level targets. I mean, we continuously are sharing that we feel that the funding levels are not sufficient for the need that we have at any given opportunity. We're also Northamptonshire, part of the F40 group, who are doing lots of lobbying on the local authorities' behalfs to say funding is insufficient. But it's really difficult. It's really difficult because I think the people that we talk to, when we talk to them, they absolutely get the problem. They completely and utterly understand our position and understand the problem.
I think that being the case, can I make? I'm sorry this because I don't want it to sound like it's just. I really think we need to talk to some other authorities, because some authorities are having some success in the context of that narrative, and I've sat through some of the meetings. I agree with you, though. I mean, it's not easy. It's not straightforward. I mean, you have a statutory duty to be honest. Obviously, I mean, there's no dressing anything up. But yes, there are caveats that come with the cost reduction plan. But I do think that, and nobody comes out of this well, not least the children in receipt of support, because I don't know about any other people, but I don't see the argument that there is a reduction in need. That you could lower the threshold at which you come in with an extra resource on need, but that's not the same thing as saying need. So even earlier diagnostic, whilst it might be helpful in preventing later high cost, it can be counterproductive. For the sake of the children, that's a good thing. In other words, you find that you just bring those costs earlier, but the quantum over the child's lifetime relatively remains the same. The very quick comment I'd like to make, I would just implore I don't think you quite meant it like this, Charlotte, but I'd just be nervous of any binaryism on we don't want children in independent provision.
Yeah, it's not
Because
that we
I don't
don't.
think that's a
Yeah.
quality statement that could be
No,
made.
no.
And we
I
have
think
to be careful that it looks like that. A lot of independent provision is very high quality, isn't it?
yeah.
It might be a cost perspective, but I'm not sure how much of those costs are hidden in other areas of council spending anyway.
I think the issue with independent provision is that we have some children there that should be in maintained special.
For sure.
That's where the issue is.
And that's
There
very
are
high
absolutely
cost.
some children who have their needs met in independent.
Yeah.
And the other issue that we have with independent is we have very little in Northamptonshire. So not only are they in independent, we're having to send them really far away from their home to access that.
Because of course this whole thing depends on third sector provision, because without it, we're totally stuffed, frankly. Thanks, Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Charlotte and Andrew. And I think, I think that point about independent provision is really well made. I think that the thing particularly for Northants is we felt because of the lack of appropriate places, we've used independent provision when that's not been the most appropriate setting, and that's added additional costs to the provision. And Andrew, I'm probably just after clarification. When you say about other local authorities that have had success, do you mean their financial success in addition to the DfE accepting the narrative in terms of the safety valve?
What I've observed is, I mean, it's never easy, right? But there seems to be a presumption of other local authorities seem to be securing funding in order to smooth a transition to a new model, as opposed to trying to survive on existing funding to make those changes. And it does seem to come with caveats. It just worries me in this environment where in finite amounts of money, is it going to be the case that those local authorities that manage to pull that off earlier get the money and other local authorities don't? And I think the quality of the analysis that you showed graphing wise, even just those top level figures, would give you a very strong foundation to have some hard-nosed discussions. Because one of the things that other local authorities are not turning up with data so much as turning up with anxiety about it. I suspect that given what you've described, the council might be turning up with a relative, a pretty well understood set of diagnostic problems. It may make you feel worse because we know how bad it is, but that is a positive in some respects, isn't it? Because you seem to have a good grasp of, if you don't want me saying from what, just listening there, you seem to have a good grasp of what the situation is and how, particularly the projection, because the projection is simply not sustainable. I don't see how the council would be underwriting any of that or would be allowed to.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean, again, I think if there are kind of local authorities or people at local authorities that you think you could point Charlotte in the direction to, then I think that would be really helpful.
Certainly.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks. Angela.
Hi, thank you. I was just going to almost reiterate some of what Andrew has already said, but just to say, Charlotte, thanks for your presentation. It's really useful. But in terms of us thinking about trying to lessen the burden, I suppose, on EHCPs, I don't think we've got any control over that. We in early years are seeing a massive increase of children coming through our doors, and likewise, the funding being inappropriate. I was going to suggest we have to go to DfE with this. Also, Bridget Phillipson's got an hour's presentation where we can put open questions to her on Tuesday. And SEND is a massive issue right across the country. It's not just Northants. I'm not trying to teach you how to suck eggs. We all know that. So how do we go about actually putting our case forward? And as Andrew and James have just said, you've got some great facts there for us to go and present and quite easily read to see, how does that compare to other authorities? Because certainly what we're seeing is a very, very significant rise in early years for ourselves. So thanks for sharing it with us, and given us a clearer picture. And, sadly, we're not in control over the next 10 years. You said your modelling was, finance, just basically for finance. But I think when you're modelling, it might be worth some of your team coming out and seeing what it's like in our settings, in our schools, what we are facing. So when you are arguing for that additionality, because I think sometimes on paper things can look okay, but the harsh reality and what we're seeing, some of our children that have moved from us on a 45-minute timetable when they go into maintained nursery schools, well, they're being really badly let down, as are their families, when children have a right to their education, but the place isn't meeting their needs. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. And I think, those probably two things link in about, I guess how the council really effectively lobbies the DfE for not just understanding, but for financial support. Because I completely agree. I think that's the first time we've probably seen the scope and scale of the issue laid out so clearly and understandably, which is great. Alison.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to kind of pick up on a point that Charlotte made, and I think Andrew made as well, around the capital element, really, in terms of that mitigations. Just to point out, obviously, the obvious is that some of those new schools that are modelled in there are all requiring additional funding over and above our current grant allocations. So they are kind of reliant on the expectation of renewed bid opportunities coming forward from the DfE or extraneous grant allocations to make them happen, really. So that comes back down to it is a catch-22 situation in that respect.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. Rob.
Thanks, James. Also, thank you, Charlotte, for the presentation. It was really useful. And I'm going to ask a slightly different question. I think a lot of the questions have been about pushing this case with the DfE. I think that's really suitable. I think we all agree that funding is not where it needs to be centrally from the DfE. I suppose my question probably is to you, Charlotte, but also maybe, Saria, to you as well, in that the DSG overspend is predominantly driven by the high needs block. And as a schools forum, we've got to be aware of that. And in the paper that Saria set out, but again, driven by the high needs block, it's quite clear that the council must take some action to try and clear the DSG deficit. So just first question is, and we know they can carry the deficit forward and then set it against the schools budget the next year. They can carry some of it forward and set some of it against the schools budget, or they can carry none of the deficit against the schools budget, but still have to clear it at some point. I just want to know what the council's thinking is about that right now, so that schools block has an understanding of that. And my second question is about what other counties are doing, some of the probably more extreme measures that other counties are doing in terms of the element 3, the high needs funding. For example, Norfolk County Council very recently slashed the rates at which they were funding high needs. And again, I just want to take what's the council's view in regard to the sustainability, financial sustainability of the current rates at which high needs are set. So 2 questions, really.
So with the DSG deficit at the moment, we have the statutory override, which kind of helps us to keep it away from against any putting it against the schools block or anything like that. We are, as part of our sort of conversations with the service and stuff and looking at this modelling and stuff, we are looking at we do need to do something about it in that sense, because the statutory override finishes in 25-26. So that is something that we need to take into account when we start to set the budget for 25-26 as well. So we're waiting for, with obviously the elections and what the government's going to say going forward, if that's going to be carried forward or not.
If I answer the second part of the question, so far in all of the modelling that we've done, nothing that we've had conversations about have been around slashing current funding to schools. I think we all recognise that schools are equally in a position where they're facing more and more deficit in their budgets, with higher levels of need coming into the system, higher level of expectations being placed on them from regulators, etc. So one of our models will not be to propose slashing the funding for EHC plans, for example. We've looked at early help locality funding because it's non-statutory. So we've looked at all of our non-statutory funding and what would happen if we removed the non-statutory funding. But the non-statutory funding is quite minor in comparison to the overall budget. So I think it equated to just less than £2 million overall. It's not going to fix the problem, and actually all it's going to do is it's going to add to the problem later if we remove some of these more early help interventions, which is what the non-statutory funding is placed on. So just to sort of reassure, that's not been built into any of our conversations that we would look to slash any funding.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah, hi, thanks. You know, I reiterate what others have said, and it's a really pretty good conversation actually, and it should probably have been had some years back in terms of the kind of trajectory, the planning. I feel like we might have missed a trick, and where other local authorities who haven't experienced what we have in the last 5 years in terms of that de-delegation puts them a little ahead. So I think, yeah, communicating and talking to and getting more out of our neighbours is really wise. But my point is, or it's not really a question, more of a kind of check-in and get the vibe really from you guys. So from local authorities' perspective, are you hearing of, is there discussion around multi-academy trusts who are interested in setting up their own independent places to take EHCPs on? Because I'm hearing it. I'm on a couple of other groups, and there is talk of it. So from my personal perspective, I can see there's inequality heading our way if that does happen, because they are more expensive places, because they are asked for the accurate, in my view, accurate funding. And to Andrew's point, it is really high quality support and provision that's on offer in many of those settings. Is that something that you're hearing from a local authority's perspective, and has DfE got a view on it?
Alison, I don't know about you, but that's the first time I've heard that mentioned, so I don't know if you've heard anything.
Sorry, is this Matt's talking about setting up is quasi the right word, independent schools? Is that what you said?
Yeah,
yes.
Special needs provision schools, yeah.
Yeah, so I have been into conversation, as many local authorities have been and are in conversations with, talking around wider mitigations around creating a new independent model, if you like, which may act in the future as some kind of disruptor in the marketplace, with a view to bringing prices down for local authorities. And obviously it's very keen to our heart, since given the costs that we incur. So yes, those conversations are ongoing. What that model looks like, it usually involves external funding sources, not-for-profit type conversations, where we're actually partners in a local authority, are partners in it. And we've had discussions with Baroness Barron. Well, we haven't, but obviously people acting on representing a project around that have, in terms of these kind of proposals. So yes, they are afoot. They have been discussed with the high ups in the DfE. They're quite interested and keen in the approach. And we're at the stage at the moment where we're just trying to establish whether that model stacks up and actually kind of will work. And certainly, as an authority, we would be foolish not to pursue it as an alternative mitigation route. I think somebody mentioned earlier about the need to think outside of the box, really, in terms of some of these mitigations. We don't give it a go.
Yeah, I think.
Alison, can I just check the position there? That what you're saying is that the local authority haven't yet got a position on whether or not they wish to support that, but that you're
This is strategic
what
development.
the council's doing is looking at, could that work?
Yeah.
As part of a sufficiency strategy,
Yes.
and will then take a view about whether or not it wishes to support that.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Alison, I think your hand was up for possibly something else.
No, I think that was it, actually. It just remained.
Ah, okay, fine. And then Sandra, does that answer your question there?
To some degree, I suppose. It's disappointing that we're not further on in that conversation, I suppose, from my colleagues' perspective, because it is a real risk. You know, many of our schools who are very keen to ensure that we are offering, you know, really good provision for children who are our most vulnerable learners. I'm very conscious of you know, parent choice and parents being given no alternative options but to go into independent, and therefore local multi-academy trusts seeing that this is a potential cash cow, and that's putting in the most blunt terms. And I'm representing Matt here, but I can see that you know, really is a dangerous direction of travel if it isn't carefully planned and thought through and considered. You know, going forward, and that's off the back of, if you don't mind me carrying on, that's off the back of years of sitting in these meetings where we know that we have overspent on you know, independent settings just simply because we don't have enough places available, and also out of county travel into alternative provision that could have been facilitated in our county. So that's what it's off the back of. I'm not saying that independent isn't okay. I completely believe that there's very good therapeutic independent support for children that is required. But I feel like there could be a bit of a risk here and a danger of multi-academy trusts seeing this as a financial opportunity.
I can't work out how to get my thumb back up again, so I'm just going to speak, sorry. There's a need for all types of places, as Charlotte touched on earlier. Yeah. So this is about creating the right places, the right number of places in the right area, to accommodate everybody in the right setting. So this is not about creating, taking away, you know, or putting at risk any existing provision or whatever. Given the sufficiency position we're in, you know, we have to look at all the options, and we have to provide the right type of selections, if you like, in terms of settings. So I don't know. I can't, you know, we're not sufficiently down the road. We're just having conversations. We're talking in a platform to see where this goes and whether we can actually develop it into something that will actually work for NNC. And indeed, you know, it may or may not involve a wider discussion with all schools at some point or other, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, and I think Sandra's point is really well made about the potential risks, isn't it? Because it's about a financial model, but it's also, if there are mats going into that for kind of slightly different reasons, it's actually at the forefront of it. It's got to be that it works educationally for those children and young people too. Sorry, Andrew, I'll bring Andrew in there.
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, I think I take your point, Sandra, but I have to admit, I work with a lot of multi-academy trusts. I don't see any of them doing it for financial reasons, but I do see them doing it for pragmatic reasons, because they're keen to provide, it's in the same way that they might employ educational psychologists or other forms of multi-sector round children workers that they don't perceive that they can gain access to from the system. That even includes dentists and optometrists, by the way. So, I mean, you know, I think when we're in a position of whether we have the risk of system collapse in terms of services for schools, you might find that those academies that are well positioned at economies of scales would be the ideal place to be encouraging that kind of behaviour and activity. So I'm not sure I don't see it as a total negative. But what I am concerned about is the joined up thinking that we need to have, and that's all this problem about this fragmented leadership. It isn't really within the local authority gift necessarily to be dictating that, because, you know, whether we want it to or not, personally I would, but, you know, let's face it, academies are set up to do what they do well, in many instances, which is to take a lead, just as the local authority is. So I don't think we should be naive. I'm a little bit anxious, and I'm pleased. I don't wish this to sound unkind on here, but I'm intrigued that Charlotte said, I didn't know about that, and Alison did. And the reason why I'm saying that is not as a personal criticism to individuals, but I just wonder about, are we fully joined up across the authority in making sure that at officer level we're sharing all that information so that we can at least get some kind of joined up constructive understanding of what might be possible? Because we've just had a really good analysis of DSEN challenges, but I'm wondering where that information is also going across the authority in the consideration of these issues. I mean,
I don't think Charlotte said that she wasn't aware of it, but I'm leading on it, so I think that's more to
Yeah, I think what I think I'd misinterpreted what Sandra was talking about. So I am broadly aware of something that Alison has been doing, but I in my head what Sandra was talking about was something different.
Okay. It's just, well, I just encourage the incorporation of that model into the analysis that we've just had. Because we didn't mention it.
It's actually, well, I don't think Charlotte mentioned it, I know, but it was built into the management plan as one of the mitigations. It's one of the routes that we can go down as an option.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Marie.
Thanks, James. Thank you, Charlotte, for the information. It's really useful to see, and I think it's good to know that building our way out of it still won't solve the problem, because that is a quick answer that lots of people give to the lack of special school places. So I think that's really useful to see it presented like that. And I like the idea of out-the-box thinking. My worry is we've got schools in deficit situations across the county, and I know we need to think outside the box, but the thought of then setting up independent sectors in maths and paying other people to do that when you've got primary schools with falling roles seems to me nonsensical. I know we were asked recently to put in an expression of interest about having a SEND unit in our schools, which I have done. And the response we got to that was lukewarm, to say the least, and had absolutely no sense of urgency whatsoever. We've been saying this in Schools Forum since I joined, which is probably about a year now, that schools have got the capacity and want to set up SEND units. So personally, I think that's where we should be looking to invest and move at pace to solve this problem, rather than throwing money at an independent sector or a multi-academy trust who, with the best will in the world, might not know the local context and have the children's interests at heart. So I really would urge whoever's leading on the piece of work around SEND units to not just fob us off and say, oh, September, we're going to look at this, but actually to get on with this with some real urgency.
Yeah, so if I can come back to you on the units, because that is one of the pieces of work I am leading on. It's not that there's not an urgency on this. As a panel, we've already met and started these conversations, but it's a very, very complex conversation to have. There are so many factors to consider. So I think we had something in the range of about 14 schools that had expressed an interest. When we're working through these expressions of interest, we have to consider where the school's located, where the children are then going to go on to, where their next steps are going to be. Is there a school that's interested there? Would there be one that might be interested in 4 or 5 years' time? Have we got any capital funding for that area specifically? What's the land like? What's the building like? What's the access routes like? There's so many criteria that needs considering, and lots of people that need to have those conversations. Once we've made those decisions, we'll build this into a bit of a pipeline project, but we don't have the capital investment to build these quickly. This will not happen very, very quickly. Those people who've expressed interest at the moment will be having these conversations over the next 6 months or so in order to start then any potential building in 6, 9, 12 months time, as and when we kind of get different elements of capital in. It's really not a quick process that we're able to put in place quickly. We absolutely recognise the need for it though, and we recognise that actually by building additional units, we are able to keep children in their communities better than if we're building independents or special schools or whatever else. But there are some children where units is not the right place for them. So we have to sort of twin track our approach. We've got high levels of needs across all different types of provision that are required. So we can't just build units. We need to do units and maintain specials and independents and a whole host of other things. So it's not that any are being prioritised over the other, it's that they all need quite a significant level of planning that goes into making the decisions around them.
Yeah, I understand that. I suppose it's as quick to build an independent special school as it is to build a unit in a maintained school. So I would just urge, as a local authority with the deficit budget situation, you look at prioritising, if not local authority maintained schools, at least local schools that already exist and who are served by the existing high needs block. Otherwise, it seems to me we're spending money unnecessarily on the independent sector.
Can I just point out the notion behind the this model that we're exploring is minimising our expenditure, so that our role as a partner, we wouldn't be the funding body. We're not, that it would be funded externally by backers, etc., where we would be partners by providing some other kind of scenario, but not financial necessarily. So just to kind of put your mind at rest in that respect.
Yeah, and I guess I was just going to ask Charlotte, how many of those expression of interest have come from schools where maybe they have had issues with falling roles and that they wouldn't need a capital project to support it? Because obviously, if there are some schools that kind of have empty classrooms and spaces currently. I take Alison's point is that may well not be the case forever, but if it is at the moment, then a unit without the need for a capital bid would obviously tick a lot of boxes.
Yeah, I think we just need to be really cautious of future proofing, because obviously pupil numbers are projected to go up in time. So whilst there might be a falling role in a spare classroom now, if that's not a spare classroom in 3 years' time, then what do we do with the children that were in that setting if that now needs to become back to being a mainstream classroom? So I understand it might solve an immediate problem now, and if potentially we agreed a new build with a school and they had a spare classroom, we could use that while the build was happening, but it can't be instead of the build happening, because if the population grows like it's projected to, we will need those classrooms in time.
Yeah, once they go to send, we don't get them back is the usual. So we could create a problem down the road if we're not careful in our projections and management of.
Yeah, no, understood. Perfect. Thanks ever so much, everyone. That was a really useful discussion, and I think a lot more clarity about the situation we're in and why we're in that situation. That's been really useful. We conclude that item there and then hand over to Imtiaz for permanent exclusion, outturn, and clawback.
Thank you, Chair. So you would have had the paper with all the information on, but I'm just going to go through the different sections. The background is that it's based on DfE guidance, and the funding formula is based on the Schools and Early Years Finance Regulations of 2023. Those are the factors that we use to claw back the funding. The reason why we put this in place is because an exclusion in one school impacts on all the schools, because it means that if that pupil has to be placed in another provision and in a more expensive provision, then the cost, there's only one pot of money that money comes out, and it affects all schools. So this is trying to level the field a little bit, but it's basically to reduce the impact on an individual school. And it's trying to make sure that that one single school is not responsible for the needs, but it's equal across the board. So one pupil being permanently excluded affects everyone in the same way. So in terms of the tables and information that you've got, if you go to section 2, it shows you the number of permanent exclusions we've had in the authority for the last financial year, and that's 133. 30 of those, as you can see, are in the secondary sector, and that's probably not surprising. In the table later on, you'll see that a lot of the permanent exclusions in table 3, it's years 8, 9, and 10 that are the years where the majority of permanent exclusions take place. Going back to table 2, the amount of clawback that we received is £683,000. And that's a lot, you know, for some, that is a lot of money. However, when you look at how much we've spent on trying to put support in for those pupils, it's a drop in the ocean. And I'll go back to that. Table 4 just gives you a breakdown by the by localities in terms of the amount of clawback. The table 5 is the amount of money we've spent on putting support into the different provisions to support those pupils on alternative provision. I go back to the conversations that Charlotte and other colleagues have had around the table earlier in this meeting. We're looking at how we support those pupils. We're looking at the different models of how we support those pupils. We haven't got the model right. We have basically inherited a model that split North and West. That meant that West had some of the facilities, North had a limited amount of facilities, but whatever model we have isn't the right model. The model of, well, once you're permanently excluded, they go into alternative provision and then they're and that's it, is an expensive model. What we're looking at, what we're trying to change, and this was the position when I started the authority in 21, is that, oh, we only do things that are legal and safe. I want to change, we're trying to change that Titanic ship to turn around so that we're trying to get early support in place. So the things like the outreach services that are doing work at the moment is to try and support the support pupils, support schools to meet the pupils in school. We also need to look at, in terms of the green paper, short-term provision that'll help schools in terms of short-term places that we can get pupils to go to and assess, identify needs and turn around and then maybe support them back into school or put them on the right pathway. We don't have any of those provisions. And then there's the tier 3 type of provision, which is about alternative provision, which is the provision that we've got, which is once a pupil's permanently excluded, it goes into a school. We're trying to do a range of different things, and I can talk more about those in a bit, but I'll stop there because I'm sure people want to ask questions around how this works and what we do in terms of support.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Can I just ask something about the that breakdown? I think table 6 about you mentioned that, you know, what you feel like is that it's not the right model at the moment because actually everything's been poured into alternative provision, and this might be a difficult question to answer, but just in that breakdown, that what kind of stood out to me is just how much is being spent on home tuition and bespoke packages and teaching, and is that the kind of key area to try and reduce so that you have I guess more organized positive provision that children that have been permanently excluded from one school can then get back into something approaching mainstream provision?
Yeah, I mean, £1.8 million is a hell of a lot of money. You can run a school on a small size school on that funding. We're looking at how we provide that. We're talking to the procurement team and our teams out there to look to see how we're providing that model, and we need to change that model because there's definitely savings to be made, more effective support to be provided for those pupils, and in a different way. That's just been growing on a year-on-year basis. The where we get stuck is the 6th day or the 7th day provision, which we have to provide immediately. That will never go down to zero. It'll have to be a certain point. But we're looking at things that are out there, looking at other authorities. Like Brighton is one that's been often mentioned in terms of a model of how schools work with with their alternative providers to provide short-term provision to lessen that. I think, one, we've got to try and lessen the number of pupils that are coming out to alternative provision by putting early help in place. But the second thing is those pupils that are excluded, we need to have a better raw deal for those pupils in terms of what we do and how we turn them around and how we put that support in place, so that there's a middle ground there that we need to do that. And that's definitely, I do feel that that £8.8 million is something that we really have to get a grip of, because there's got to be a better deal for those people using that money.
Yeah, agreed. No, yeah, that completely chimes with sort of experience. And I think exactly as you say, sometimes those things are put in to meet the duty to provide day 6 provision, and then they end up there for weeks and months.
And that's that. In addition to that, I mean, the number of places we've got in terms of alternative provision is practically zero. So I mean, these provisions we have are full, so they're in those provisions for longer periods of time. So the number of conflated issues that actually increase that size of that pot that we have to spend on that. We talked about the buildings not being the answer, but it's certainly one of the answers in terms of the immediacy of trying to solve that bit of the puzzle.
Great, thank you. Anything further? Thanks very much, and we'll close that there. And then I'll invite Alison, Pupil Growth Fund, please.
Chair, Alison sent her apologies. She's had to go to another meeting.
I'm still here, Yoki. I'm just about to go, actually, so I'm still here. Can quickly run through it. So thank you. So it's going to be a very quick run through because there is no changes to any of the criteria. So in terms of the report that was produced in your pack, the Pupil Growth Fund outturn for 23-24 leaves us with a surplus underspend of £8.5 or £8.8 thousand pounds. And you can see within the growth fund paper that there's an allocation of each area there showing whether it be primary, secondary, or by planning area, which I'm not going to go into. You've got that there for yourself. So within the report, and I'm not. Do you want me to share this? Would it be helpful to share it? Or James, you're on mute.
Sorry, thanks. We have had it in advance, so
yes.
Unless there's a
so I'll just run through the figures.
Yeah.
Within the pack there's obviously you can see it broken down by planning area, secondary and primary again for projected. So we set a budget of 2.2 million, broadly speaking, and we've got a projected forecast at this moment in time, and I haven't built anything else in yet. In terms of commitments to date, 1.3. So there's still just over £1 million, I think, there to support any additional growth moving forward. And this is mostly, obviously, as you may know, some of you on this call will know that obviously it's the in-year pressures plus the forecast deficit of year 7, which has meant we've had to secure quite a significant amount of bulge, as well as capital projects to develop and expand PANs. So that's the majority of where the funding has gone, really. Any questions? I can hear somebody, but very quietly. Is somebody speaking?
No, I can't see a hand up, Alison. You might be safe. That might just be background noise.
Sandra.
Great. Yes, sorry, Sandra. Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick one. Really linking to all that we've already spoken about in this meeting. The setting of the additional places formula for secondary and primary table in part 1, so the background information. We all know that those figures are quite out of date if we're talking about 14,000 for an LSA, 1 per class. And I don't know how it compares in secondary, perhaps somebody else can help, but I imagine that figure of 26 is much more in line with what we're actually paying for TAs in primary perhaps it's higher in secondary. When does that get reviewed, and does it get reviewed according? This is just information for me so that I understand. When does that change, or should it already be changed? I get that it's 21-22, and that's what the figures were set at.
I would agree with you. Inflationary wise, it is a bit stuck, isn't it, in terms of the increase in inflation we just had recently.
Will it be reflected in information going forward for growth funding then?
Well, Yoki, do you have a view on this? I believe that the school forum and ourselves I believe that we can review it and actually agree an increase, but I think we'd need to double check with the DfE guidance on it, so we can come back next time on that. Is that okay?
Thanks, Alison.
They do have a lot of strict criteria we have to kind of abide by. So we will double check that, but I take the point, and it's something that's been fed back to me on numerous occasions, Sandra.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I think that would be useful, clarifying, whether or not that's DfE that sets it or whether it's us. And if it is us, then what's the process for review would be really helpful. Rob.
Thanks, James. Yeah, just briefly, Alison. The paper sets out the planning area growth funding for the different regions of Northamptonshire secondary and primary. Can you just give us a bit more indication that there seems to be a really high really high value for primary growth in 24-25 for the Wellingborough area? It takes up for 580,000 of the £800,000. Just sort of talk to us a little bit about that.
That is primarily around DfE lump sums, etc. for the Glenville will be relocations and new school scenarios. So there's growth funding that goes towards that, and also Stanton Cross payments as well. There is also some growth funding in there for new satellites, for growth funding for send places growing out into satellites to support that.
So the Glenvale school, some of the money is being set aside for growth of pupils or for other aspects.
They're actually they're going from half FE to 1 FE. Sorry, half FE to 1 FE. Is the right way around? When they move into Glenville.
Right, but I mean that's not £583,000, is it? I mean, half an FE according to yours is £28,000. It's
not, but there's also funding for rowing gates, satellites, etc. There's the Glenvale will be, and there is, as I said, Stanton Cross satellite, and as the rowing gate satellite at Tennyson Road, etc. So that's all in there. Okay, so it's actually covering expansion for special school places as well as expansion for a small amount. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Marie.
Thanks, James. Yeah, just a similar point to Rob, really. I'm surprised that newly opened schools need to be subsidised by local authority growth funding, because presumably their initial DfE grant understood that they had an increasing role year on year, and they're given empty space top-ups to cover their initial setup cost. So I can't quite see why that's a surprise to the local authority and comes under the pupil growth funding, because I would have thought that would have just been all within the budget of setting up a brand new school. Some of the Glenvale will be is covered by APT, which is the budgeted for element, and some of it is the is growth fund in terms of their numbers as they've been coming through, basically in terms of the new year for September 24. But this is not a typical new school scenario. It's an existing school moving into a new building as a 1 FE from a half FE. So it's a variant to what the normal scenario is. I understand that, but surely that's offset from the fact that the DfE presumed they were funding a brand new 2 FE school, so that any... No, they've never agreed to fund the 2 FE school. So we had a 2 FE building, but they've never agreed, and that was why we've actually undertaken this particular action of relocating Wilby into Glenvale, is because we couldn't support a 2 FE because of the pupil projections. That's the whole reason why we're doing it this way. So it has created a slight anomaly
in terms of how it's done. So yes, some of it is budgeted for, but some of it isn't. So they didn't attract the same level of say that Stanton Cross did in terms of a brand new school, and this is what you get, bam, bam, bam. It's not quite that scenario. I don't know whether Yoki's got anything to add to that. You're on mute, Yoki.
I don't think the Wilby scenario is unique because I don't think Glenville was actually budgeted as part of the APT in the, as funding for that new school. Because we didn't know then, did we?
At the outset, although the
Yeah.
census has given us some figures for the existing school. I think that's what I was
So we're
referring to.
actually expanding Wilby in effect.
Yes, yes.
So essentially, it's the local authorities growth fund that's picking up the tab for that.
Yes.
Yeah, the centrally held growth fund, the one that we set aside as growth fund, it wasn't part of the APT calculation. So we set aside a pot of money for growth fund, to address voucher funding, and obviously with the expansion of Wilby, in September, we've had to obviously take this outgrowth this growth fund. But obviously when we come to do 25-26 APT, it will be classed as a one form entry school because obviously they would have open as, a one form entry instead of half a form entry.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thank you. Sorry, Rob, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just one quick follow-up on that. You're saying that Wilby will expand from a half form entry to a one form entry, and then it'll be covered under the APT when it does that. Is that where it will stay, or are you expecting it to go to a two form entry at some point, and therefore will it then call upon the growth fund again, or not?
No, well, I'm hoping it'll be planned for in that sense. So we're watching that there's no plans immediately to grow it to 2FE, but we're looking to plan to open it as a 2FE at the appropriate time. So hopefully we'll be budgeting for it on the basis of the forecast coming through, that we'll know that it will need to the following year, if you see what I mean, to go to 2FE, and then we can actually manage it through.
So just so again, just so I'm clear, so are you saying from 26-27 you are planning for it as a two form entry primary school?
No, I'm saying it's being led by the forecast and the pupil projections. And we're just, as you know, we're just undertaking the SCAP for July, so that's reforecasting. So when we've got those figures through and on our desk, then we'll be able to make a more informed decision.
Okay, thank
but
you.
There's no plans for it immediately to go to 2FE.
Yeah, no, understood. What basically you're saying is when there's pupil pressures, that will be the time to do it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Marie, did you ever want to come back on one thing there?
Yes, sorry, just for clarity. So the local authorities figures allow, what was it, circa 50k for a one class growth expansion. The Wellingborough figures suggest 10 classes worth of expansion have been funded, and yet we're only talking about half a class at Wilby. And surely the satellite send provision shouldn't come from growth funding, because it's not surprising growth, it's just a change in status of the school that a pupil needs.
It's not, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're saying, Marie. It is growth when we're creating new places.
But they're for children already in the school system.
No, they're new places. So when we open a satellite, they're new children. So they may be in the system, but they're moving to year groups. They need a school place somewhere, and they haven't got a school place.
Just so for my understanding, though, I can't see where 10 classes worth come from. If we're saying it's about 50,000 per class, and we're spending about £500,000 in Wellingborough, where are the 10 classes?
I don't think we are spending that all in Wellingborough. It's split between two planning areas. And several
it's
schools.
£583,000 according to table 4 for primary school places in Wellingborough in 24-25. That's table 4. And then in table 1.4, it's about £56,000 growth fund for an additional 30 places. So that suggests roughly 10 classes. That's what I'm struggling to get my head around. Working in that locality, I just don't know where those 10 classes are.
There are 2 satellites that this growth funding is paying for, brand new satellites, places, and it's also paying for the Glenvale will be growth from the
So
one
that's,
FE.
that's
Sorry,
2.5.
Yeah, but I also think, and this might, you'll have to tell me if I'm right here, that I think that total there includes some capital spend. So it's not just the spend per
No, it's not
class.
capital, it's just revenue, that figure. That is just growth fund.
I'm
So
not an
that then-
accountant. I just would like to understand it, working in that locality, where these additional 10 classes of 30 pupils are.
James, would it be worth just asking for the next meeting just to break that figure down a little bit, just so we get some more figures? I'm sure the local authority can do that.
Yeah.
I think that probably, I think that's a really sensible suggestion. I think that probably is what we need, because if that doesn't include any capital, you would expect that that's 10 times, that's 300 extra places within Wellingborough, wouldn't you? So I wonder if that figure's quite right, and maybe that has sort of slightly inadvertently has included capital. I don't know.
There's no capital in there. This is all growth fund.
Yeah. So that would be an expectation of.
We'll provide an
300
update
places.
at the next meeting with a breakdown.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Lovely, Robert.
So I was just about to put my hand down. No, it was just to request, similar, if we could break it down by school. If it's any help, I understand the pressures and the support council give for growth. Having had schools in Milton Keynes have supported growth a lot. But it'd be great if we could have a breakdown per school and the number of places and the funding allocated. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and obviously that would be great if we did not just for the Wellingborough and that figure, but actually if we included that as a standard part of the report, I think that would be really helpful for transparency and to allow for them to understand exactly where those monies are going. I think that was a good idea for kind of future standard practice, I guess. Thanks, Alison. And finally, over to Raj just for the Forum Forward plan.
Yes, I'll just share my screen. So for the next meeting, which is to be held on the 17th of October, we have 3 items on the agenda for decision. As always, we have our standing items. As Alison just went through there with the Pupil Growth Fund, we'll bring back a breakdown of those figures a bit more. But these are on the screen now with the ad hoc items for decision for the next meeting. And obviously I'll check in with officers before that meeting to see if there's anything else we'll be adding.
Great, thanks, Raj. Any questions on any of that? Thank you. And finally, any other business? No, perfect. Thanks ever so much for your participation. Some really good and useful discussions there. It's the last meeting, obviously, before the summer. So have a great summer, and we look forward to reconvening in September. Thanks. Bye-bye.